My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, and that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Perhaps you've heard of the famous author of children's fairy tales and stories. His name was Hans Christian Andersen. I'm not sure if he was Dutch or Belgian, but he was writing in maybe 100 years ago or so, and many of his stories became quite popular. Maybe you've heard of The Little Mermaid, right, which Disney made famous, but originally was a Hans Christian Andersen tale, or The Ugly Duckling, or Thumbelina, or The Princess and the Pea. He has a very famous tale, which I think everybody has heard of in one form or another, which is called The Emperor's New Clothes. And I'll just kind of summarize the story. Two swindlers arrive at the capital city of an emperor who spends lavishly on clothing at the expense of state matters. Posing as weavers, these swindlers offer to supply the emperor with magnificent clothes that are invisible to those who are stupid or incompetent. The emperor hires them, and they set up looms and they get to work. A succession of officials, and then the emperor himself, visit them to check their progress. Each sees that the looms are empty, but pretends otherwise to avoid being thought a fool. Finally, the weavers report that the emperor's suit is finished. They mime dressing him, and he sets off in a procession before the whole city. The townsfolk uncomfortably go along with the pretense, not wanting to appear inept or stupid, until finally a child blurts out that the emperor is wearing nothing at all. The emperor has no clothes. It's a very funny story and a kind of a foolish portrait of pride. The pride of this emperor who allows himself to be duped. Pride has this amazing way of warping reality. It's a warped reality in which everyone remains silent. This farce, this ridiculous situation of suspended reality, is finally resolved, or rather shattered, by the candid and sincere statement of an innocent child who sees things as they are. Now, in this story, the swindlers are clearly the villains, right? These two men who kind of deceive and fool the emperor, but also the people around him. The emperor is also clearly at fault for being so vain and proud. But we could say that there's another kind of subtle villain in this story, or villains. Those who lived or worked closely with the emperor, we can think of his family and also of his staff, his officials and court people, who lived with him, worked with him, and had the opportunity to point out the problem, to point out the reality. But they remain silent. This is villainous, this is evil, the silence before the sin of another. In a way, that silence is a sin in and of itself. Today, in the gospel, Jesus, you tell the disciples, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have won over your brother. This practice, which is ancient in the church, we often call fraternal correction, where between brothers or sisters, between a brother and sister, between men and women in the family of Jesus Christ, we point out something that we see. We advise or we acknowledge someone, we alert them to a problem that we see. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone in private, as a charitable, fraternal conversation. Imagine if that had been the case in the story of the emperor. If someone close to him had the courage and the kindness to point out to him that he's not wearing any clothes, that these weavers are actually swindlers, and that they're fooling him. He would have, had that been done, the emperor would have been spared a lot of suffering. Jesus, you want us to live this kind of fraternal correction with each other, that we love one another when we are willing to help each other. And sometimes that help can be painful because we have to point out to one another our respective failures or mistakes or defects. Lord, you invite us to participate in your mercy by showing each other how to avoid sin. St. Josemaria often said this. He said, to practice fraternal correction, which is so deeply rooted in the gospel, is a proof of supernatural trust and affection. Be thankful for it when you receive it, and don't neglect to practice it with those around you. Pope Francis often spoke about fraternal correction, and in his papacy, we remember how he stressed that fraternal correction prevents, and this is a quote of his, that bitterness of heart which brings anger and resentment and which leads us to insult and aggression. It's terrible to see an insult or taunt issue from the mouth of a Christian. To insult is not Christian. And we can think about our own experience. Is it true, perhaps, that sometimes we insult another person? Maybe not openly, although sometimes this happens, but maybe we are insulting them in our heart. Jesus, am I aware of having done this, of having kind of thought critically of someone in my heart, but without doing anything about it, simply insulting the person, either verbally or in my heart? Lord, I don't want to do this. I want to think well of people, and when I see something that is off, when I see something that needs to be corrected, rather than simply insulting the person or thinking badly of them, am I moved to help them? Am I moved to find a way to assist them in this difficulty or in this defect so that they can grow? Now, Jesus, you continue in the gospel by saying, if he does not listen, right, if the person that you correct does not listen, take one or two others along with you, so that every fact may be established on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell the church. This points to another struggle I think we all need to live with, which is that we should be helping each other by indicating or making corrections when necessary, but we also need to, on the receiving end, be willing to listen, be willing to receive correction from others. Are we open to feedback? Are we open to suggestions? Or do we always think that we are in the right? Do we have the humility to welcome those suggestions from others and even ask for them? I think it's a very good thing to foster the habit of asking people for feedback, to welcome their input. Pope Francis gave this advice to people within marriage. I think within married couples, this is especially important, that married people learn to help each other rather than remaining silent when we see something, pointing it out in a charitable and loving way, and also being willing to receive that correction. This is what he says. Another great challenge of marriage is to help couples realize that their marriage is not something that happens once and for all. Their union is real and irrevocable, confirmed and consecrated by the sacrament of matrimony. Yet in joining their lives, the spouses assume an active and creative role in a lifelong project. Their gaze now has to be directed to the future, that with the help of God's grace, they are daily called to build. For this very reason, neither spouse can expect the other to be perfect. Each must set aside all illusions and accept the other as he or she actually is, an unfinished product, needing to grow, a work in progress. And so that's an important aspect, right, of our living together, whether it's in a marriage or in our common fraternity, in our families, among our friends, within the church, that we are all works in progress, and that we can't expect that, as soon as we get to know one another, that our friendship is going to be perfect, or that as soon as someone gets married, that everything is now hunky-dory. No, we continue to grow, and that will come about precisely through the Christian practice of fraternal correction. We ask Our Lady, who is mother of all Christians, that she help us to live this fraternity with one another, not remaining in silence when we see a problem, but having the courage to speak out in charity. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask your help in putting them into effect. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.